Masechet Baba Batra Daf Sadi. We stopped in the middle of a baraita. We read the first part, and now we're going to see the second part. The second part is going to give various measurements for dry goods and for liquid volume. So let's review the beginning of the baraita. Lo yashe adam midah chasera o yetera betoch beto, va'afilu hi abid shel meme raglayim. One should not keep in one's house a measuring vessel that is too little or more than what's said on it. It says it's a kav, and it's actually a little bit more, or a little bit less. Not only can you not use it, you're not even allowed to own it or keep it in your house. And even if you're not using it to measure things to buy or sell, even if you're just using it as a chamber pot, nevertheless, it's prohibited to have such an item. Okay, that was the first half that we learned already, and now we see the standard measurements that you are allowed to make measuring vessels out of. And you should not make any measuring vessels for non-standard amounts, because they'll be too close to the standard amounts and it'll be easy to trick people. So this is the idea. Everybody has only these standard amounts, and that way everything will be clear. Aval osehu se'ah tarkab v'chasi tarkab v'kab v'chasi kab v'rova v'tomen v'chasi tomen v'ukela. Okay, so one can make, this is volume measures for dry goods. We're going to get to liquids in just a minute. A person can make a se'ah volume or tarkav. Tarkav comes from Greek tri-kav, so that's 3 kav. The ratio between se'ah and the tri-kav is 2-1. Most of the items from one to the next are going to be a ratio of 2-1. In other words, each successive measurement is half of the one before. So that makes it pretty easy. Okay, so se'ah to tarkav is 6 kav to 3 kav. And then the next one is chatzi tarkav, half of a tri-kav. Well, that would be 1.5 kav. And so you see that this measurement is not going to be half of the one before. And we have a nice chart here that is a little confusing, but actually makes it clearer if you pay attention to it. So we have a se'ah, which is 6 kav, tarkab, which is 3. So that's a 2-1 ratio. Okay, very good. The Gemara is going to talk about why don't we have a kabayim, a double kav. It's not in the list. The Gemara will talk about why. So it's not actually here. That's why it's crossed out, because it's not on the list. All right, but we'll come to that. Now we have a chatzi tarkav, and so from 3 to 1.5, that's a 2-1 ratio. So that's very good. That fits the pattern. But next, here's the problem. We go from 1.5 to 1 kav, and that's a 3-2 ratio, right? There's only a third between. If you take a third less of 1.5, you get to 1. Same as 3-2. So this is a smaller ratio than the 2-1s that we had before. Now, from kav to chatzi kav, that's the next one, is a 2-1, so that's good. And from there to the next one, the line, if there's nothing on the line, that means the baraita did not say anything for it, so one does not make such a thing. And so from chatzi kav to rova, that's from a half of a kav to a quarter of a kav, that's a 2-1 ratio. And from there, tomen is an eighth, and chatzi tomen is another half of that, a 16th of a kav, and then it ends off with an ukla. Ukla is only 20% less than a chatzi tomen, as the Gemara is going to say now. So let's get back to that. So we said all these. V'kamahi ukela. How much is an ukla? Achad mechamisha berebiya. It's a fifth of a quarter of a kav. So a fifth of a quarter, right? As we said here, here's the quarter of a kav, and you take a fifth of that, gets you to a 20th of a kav, but that's not half of a chatzi tomen. That's only a little bit less. That concludes the volume for dry measures. Now, for liquid measures, a lot of them are equivalent, but they have different names because you use different vessels for liquids as for flour and dry goods. Ubemidat halach hu osehin v'chatzihin ushlishitahin urbi'itahin velog v'chatzilog urbi'it ushminit v'chad mishemona bishminit v'zehu kortob. So regarding liquids, we have a hin. Now, a hin is equivalent equivalent to a tarkav. So that's interesting that you don't have a bigger measure of a se'ah, and this is just the reality. It's describing what people had. Probably because when it comes to dry goods, you measure bigger things, whereas liquids, it's not usual to measure such a large amount regarding liquids. So the biggest is a hin. And then we go to a half a hin, and that's the same. That's the same as a half of a tarkav. These are equivalent measures. And from there, shilishi tahin is the same as a kav. And here we're also going to note that this is not half. From a half, this is not half of the one before. From a half of a hin to a third of a hin is a ratio of 3 to 2, not 2 to 1. Same as chatzi tarkav to a kav. And then you have in the liquid one another scale that you don't have in the dry goods, which is revi'i tahin. And this is a just 4 to 3 ratio. Okay, this is important because it's going to come up in a second. Now you have that, revi'i tahin, instead of a chatzi kav. So these are kind of different in the dry and the wet measures. But then we go to a log, which is the same as a rova hakav. And then we're good from there. Was half of that is a chatzi log, half of that is a revi'it halog, and then we have something that is equivalent to an ukla, echad mechamisha barova. But this is not mentioned in the Baraita, so we don't have to worry about that. Instead, the Baraita goes to sheminit halog, which is half of the one before, and kortov, which is half of the one before. So all these things, all the rest of the list of the wet measures are all in a 2 to 1 ratio, so those make perfect sense. Okay, now we ask, V'le'ebid name kabayim. Why don't we have a kabayim, a 2-kav measurement? Wouldn't that be useful to have something between a tri-kav and a 3-kav and a half of that, which is 1.5? Why not have a 2-kav in the middle? And the answer is atel le'achlufe betarkav, because you're going to get confused between the double kav and the triple kav. They're both pretty large measures, and there's only a 3 to 2 relationship, and so people will get confused. So alma ta'u inashe tilta. We can learn from there that people will get confused when it comes to a difference of 1/3. 1/3 of the bigger number. Easier to call it just 3 to 2 ratio. People will get confused. All right, now that we see that, well, if so, then don't make a kav, because the difference between a kav and a chatzi tarkav is also a 3 to 2 relationship, right? A half of 3 kav is 1.5, and kav is 1. So that's also the same thing, meaning if you're going to not have the difference between tarkav and kabayim, because that's a 3 to 2 relationship and is confusing, then why do you have chatzi tarkav and a kav, which is also a 3 to 2 relationship? That's the question. So we answer, Ela kabayim hainu ta'amad la'abid de'ate le'ich lufe b'chasi tarkav. We change our answer and said, actually, you know why we don't want to make a double kav measuring cup? Because one will confuse it with the half of the tarkav. In other words, the double measure will be confused with this one below. Before we said that the kabayim will be confused with the tarkav, which is a 3 to 2 relationship. But then we said, but there's another 3 to 2 relationship between chasi tarkav and kav, so that can't be it. Instead, the problem is that we'll get confused between kabayim and chatzi tarkav, because that's a 4 to 3 relationship. It's only a 25% difference, much smaller difference. That's what we're worried about. Okay, so that makes sense, and that solves that question that we just had. So alma ta'e'ina sheriv'ah. So we learned from this that people will get confused when it comes to a quarter difference, meaning a 4 to 3 relationship. Yachi chatzi tomen ve'ukela la'li abid. But if so, then all the way down here, why do you have a chatzi tomen and an ukla, which is only a 20% difference? That's even less than a 25% difference, and yet it is listed in the Baraita. So you're not consistent in your principle. Amar Papa midot ketanot biki'e vehu inashe. The Papa has an answer. When it comes to very small measures, people are well versed in it. They can distinguish. People use very small measures normally in their house. Big measures are not using as often. And also the human eye, you can tell a difference when it comes to a small thing rather than a big thing. For example, if I show you an inch and 3/4 of an inch, you'd be able to tell one from the other. But if I tell you, look at that road out in the distance, is that 1 mile or 3/4 of a mile? Then that may be harder to tell. And so when it's small, you can pick up on those very subtle differences more easily than the same ratio when it comes to large measurements. Okay, so that explains all of the dry measurement and those increments. And now we go to the wet. Shilishi tahin, rebi tahin, lade abid. So then you should not make a third of a hin and a quarter of a hin. That's over here. Third of a hin and a quarter of a hin. That's a 4-to-3 relationship. And you just established that when it comes to relatively large measurements, a quarter difference is not going to be distinguishable, and people will confuse one with the other and use it for trickery. Is the idea that if someone says, "Oh, I want to buy a third of a hin," and then the seller will use a revi'i tahin because the buyer won't readily notice the difference. So how come over there it's allowed? And the answer is kevan tehavu b'mikdash la gazru behu rabanan. The answer is because these measurements were used in the Bet HaMikdash when you have to give the various libations, the yayin nesech. So you need a half of a hin for an ox, a third of a hin for a ram, a quarter of a hin for a sheep. So since in the Bet HaMikdash the Torah says you have to have these measurements, therefore the rabbis aren't going to make a gezerah and say that you can't use them. Since they use the Bet HaMikdash, there's no gezerah and you could use. So these are exceptions. B'mikdash name ligzor. Now we ask, why don't you make a gezerah in the Bet HaMikdash? Because they may come to make a mistake in the Bet HaMikdash and they'll get the wrong one, which would be really bad. Then you're doing the sacrifice all wrong. And the answer is kohanim zirizin hem. The kohanim are very careful. They're more careful than just people at home that might come to mix things up either by mistake or maybe even on purpose if they want to trick someone. But the kohanim are very careful. They want to make sure to do the avodah in a precise way, and so there's no need to make a gezerah regarding the kohanim who are serving in the Bet HaMikdash. אמר שמואל, אין מוסיפין על המידות יותר משטות, ולא על המטבע יותר משטות, והמשתכר על השתכר יותר משטות. Shemuel says 3 laws. One may not increase measurements more than 1/6. In other words, in a certain place, let's say they have a gallon measurement, and now the community decides that they want to redefine what a gallon is, and they want to make it bigger or smaller than what it was before. So they can do so. Everybody agrees it's okay, but that change should not be more than 1/6. We'll see why. And furthermore, if they're changing the value of a currency, we're talking about when it has the same name beforehand, a gallon, they're redefining a gallon. Or here, a dollar, they want like the US dollar, they're going to use the Canadian dollar. So they're changing the amount of what something is called. They're calling it a dollar, but it's going to be worth a different amount. They can do so, but they cannot change, the change cannot be more than 1/6 of what it was before. And furthermore, when someone makes a profit, when they're selling something, their profit may not be more than 1/6, which is the law of ona'ah. Now let's analyze. En mosifin al midot yoter mishetut. My ta'ama. So Shemuel, you said that you cannot add to measurements more than 1/6. What's the reason? Ilema mishum afko etar'a shetut namila. If it's because it's going to raise the market price, how will it do that? Let's say we have a gallon of milk, and all of a sudden we decide gallons are all going to get 50% bigger. Okay, fine. Now there's a new definition of a big gallon. In turn, the milk sellers are going to have to raise their price. Naturally, there's more than what used to be in a gallon of milk. But we're afraid that once they're raising the price, they'll take advantage. And instead of raising it just 50%, which would be fair, they're going to raise it even more because they can get away with that. Oh, the price went up. Didn't you hear? Like when there's inflation. All right, inflation is a small percent, and then people are all of a sudden selling things for double. So that's what we're afraid of. Well, if that's what the problem is, then even if it's just 1/6 is also going to be the same problem. Let's say we say a gallon is only 5% bigger than when it was before, but then the milk sellers will increase their margin and increase more than 5%, 7%. So you still have the same problem whether it's 1/6 or more than 1/6. So making it 1/6 or less doesn't help. So that can't be the explanation of Shemuel. Ela mishum ona'ah. Dela leve bitul mikach. Rather, it's because we don't want to come to exploitation and make the sale null and void. We're afraid that, let's say, in this place, we made the gallon 50% bigger. Now, let's say someone comes from elsewhere and they don't know that we changed the definition of a gallon. And then they're going to end up selling a small gallon for the price of the big gallon because they're going to see what the price is over here, and they'll end up exploiting people, and then the whole sale will be null and void. We're going to have to find all those people that he sold milk to, and it's going to cause a big mess. And therefore, if you're going to change, Shemuel says, change it by a maximum. That way, even if someone comes and by mistake is selling the smaller gallons for the price of the big gallons, nevertheless, it won't nullify the sale. All right, that sounds like a good reason, but here's the problem. Rava said that anytime you have something that is measured by volume, by weight, or by number, even if it's less than 1/6, then that's called exploitation, and you reverse the sale. In other words, when do we apply ona'ah and you have a margin of error of 1/6? That's when there's an item that is definitely the same item, but we're not sure what its value is. I sell you a camera, and the camera really is worth 100 on the market, and now I go and I sell it for significantly more. Or maybe an item, a watermelon. It's one watermelon, and now I'm saying, it's really good quality. I'm selling it for more than it's worth. That's when you apply the law of ona'ah, and you can go up to 1/6 more than the value. I changed from camera to watermelon because really it only applies to staple goods, not to luxury goods. Okay. Anyway, so it only applies to the relative value of an item. But when it comes to something that you can weigh or count, if I supposed to sell you a dozen eggs, I only deliver 11 eggs. So do you say, oh, well, that's less than 1/6 of a disparity, so the sale goes through? No, it doesn't go through, right? 12 eggs, a dozen means 12, and it can't be 11, it can't be 13. It has to be an exact number. And the same thing with weight or volume measurement. So if it's the wrong volume measurement, if the guy is, the milkman is selling you a gallon and it's really a small gallon when it should be the price of a big gallon, then it's going to be null and void, even if it's a small difference, because that's a measurable difference, a difference in weight tricking someone, or volume, that even the tiniest bit makes the whole thing null and void. And therefore, it's not going to help if it's less than 1/6, even a little bit also will make the sale void. Rather, we want to protect the merchant so that he doesn't have a loss. How would the merchant have a loss? Let's say in some place they make the measurement of a gallon smaller than it was before, and some merchant comes in and he doesn't realize, and he's selling big gallons for the price of small gallons. Now, if you allow people to make a big jump, and now a gallon is half of what it was before, and he's selling these gallons, he's going to be losing half the amount on every sale, and that's going to be a huge loss. Instead, we say, okay, what's the usual margin of profit for such a salesman? Usually it's 1/6. Okay, so if he comes in and he's giving big gallons for the price of small gallons, so then at maximum he won't have any profit, because it's only 1/6. If we allow maximum 1/6 of a difference, so then the biggest loss he can have is 1/6, and that was his profit to begin with. So he'll end up selling it at cost. At least he won't be having a loss. So this is to protect merchants that don't realize that there's a new measurement in town. But we challenge that as well. Okay, we understand. I'm happy for the merchant that doesn't lose, but it also doesn't have a gain. If someone buys and sells at the same price, do you call him a merchant? He can buy and sell all day, buying at the same price that he's selling. That's not called a merchant. He needs a profit. He's working hard. He has expenses, so you can't just let him break even. That's not called called a merchant, and you're not really protecting him. Rather, we have yet another answer. The question was, how does Shemuel know that 1/6 is the maximum that you can add to measurements and currencies? And so now we're going to say he actually learns it from a pasuk. Ela amar Rav Chisda Shmuel kera ashkach uderash ve'ashekel 20 gera 20 shekalim 5 ve'asrim shekalim 10 v'chamisha shekel hamaneh yeh lachem. Rav Chisda says that Shmuel found this pasuk in Yechezkel. Let me tell you what the pasuk says because it's a confusing pasuk. Yechezkel's talking about the Bet HaMikdash in the future, which is going to be bigger, grander, and greater than any before. Everything is going to be increased, including the money, the currency. And he's saying that the currency, the amount of a maneh, is going to be worth more than it is now. Okay, now how much more? So the proof is going to be that he increased it by only 1/6. That's how Shemuel learned it. Learned that when you increase something, why if Yechezkel is talking about the glorious future, why not say that the maneh is 100 times, 1,000 times what it is today? Because when you increase, you're allowed to increase and change the definition of a currency, but what's the maximum? Yechezkel is doing the maximum, and as we're going to see, he's going to change it from 50 to 60. Okay, we have to do some calculation, however, first. This pasuk is written in a confusing way. It says that a shekel is 20 gera. Okay, forget that. That's not what we need for our purpose. We need the following. It's defining a maneh. Now, a maneh, by definition, means 100. It means 100 dinar. Okay, 100 dinar, and generally there are 4 shekel in a dinar. Okay, but keep that in mind, write that down. Now, here the pasuk is saying how many shekalim are in a maneh, and it lists a whole bunch of denominations, and what you have to do is add them all up. It says 20 and 5 and 20, so that's 20 plus 25 is 45, plus another 10, 55, plus another 5 is 60. Okay, so that's, if you have to add them all together, we'll see why it's, why not just say 60? Why make it separate like this? Hold on a second. Okay, so 60, there are 60 shekalim in one maneh. But now that doesn't make sense. Maneh, is that really a maneh, which means really 100? Maneh means 100 dinar, but there are 4 dinar to a shekel. So if there are 60 shekalim in a maneh, then how many dinar would there be? 240. 60 times 4. Matan v'arbe'in havu. So we have a problem because you can't have 240 dinar in a maneh because there has to be 100 dinar in a maneh. That's the definition of it. So, in fact, shekalim has to be 25, right? That would now all make sense. 25 shekalim in a maneh, and each shekel is 4 dinar. 25 times 4 is 100. That's the correct ratio. So, what does this pasuk mean? Ela shema mina telat. Rather, we're going to learn 3 things from this pasuk, and then everything will be in order. Shema mina maneh shel kodesh kaful haya. Number 1, all the currency in the Bet HaMikdash was double that of the common currency used outside the Bet HaMikdash. And so the usual amount, the usual ratio of 25 shekel per maneh, that's what is done in the street. But in the Bet HaMikdash, it's doubled. Double 25 is 50. Okay, so in the Bet HaMikdash, this is the way it was before Yechezkel, is 50 shekel to a maneh. And Yechezkel saying, it's going to increase in the future from 50 to 60. So that could be why it says 10 separately, because it's giving different increases over time. Now, that's one thing we learn. Shema mina mosifin al hamidot ven mosifin yoter mishetut. And we learn from here that you can increase measurements and here currency, but the maximum you can increase is 1/6. Ushma mina shetuta milibar. And we learn further that when you calculate the 1/6 is from the outside, meaning from the resulting number. It's not a sixth of 50, but rather it's a sixth of the total amount that you come up with at the end. In other words, you're going to end up with 60. Well, a sixth of 60 is 10. So that's fine. That's what you're allowed to increase. It'd be the same as saying a fifth of the original amount. A fifth of 50 is 10, or a sixth of 60. So the sixth that you're calculating is from the outside, meaning from the total sum at the end. And that was Shemuel's source for saying that one can increase, but only for a maximum of 1/6. And now we have a story. Rav Papa bar Shemuel taken kaila bar telata kefizeh. Rav Papa, the son of Shemuel, he made a new measurement that was the size of 3 kefizeh. And that's the same as 3 log. If we look on our chart, he made a dry measurement that was the same as a revi'i tahin, which is 3 log, you see. So for the wet measurement, you have a revi'i tahin, so that's fine. But he wanted to make a dry measurement where we didn't have that. If you remember, on the list that we started with, we had chatzi tarkav, we had kav, we had chatzi kav, but we didn't have anything on this line, which we do have in the wet. So he wanted to fill it in and make a measurement over here. Now, notice the ratios. The difference between kav and this new one he's making is a 4-to-3 relationship. And the difference between this and the chatzi kav is a 3-to-2. Both ways, it's more than 1/6. And so how is he allowed, right, either as a quarter or a third? But either way, it's more than a 6. So how was he allowed to do that? Shemuel says that when you want to change the amount of a measurement, you can only change it 1/6, but you're changing it at least a quarter. Amar lehu ana kaila chadata takine. And he explained, I'm making a totally new measurement. I'm not changing the definition of a log or a kav and saying from now on a kav is worth 1.5 kav. No, I'm making a totally new measurement, and so I'm allowed to do that. I want to fill in that, plug in that hole. After all, for the liquid measurement, you have such a thing, so I want to make it over there. Shedare le pumpedita vela kibeluha, shedare le papunya vekibeluha, vekadule ros papa. So they asked the question, are we allowed to do that? They asked the rabbis in the city of Pumbedita, and they did not accept it. They said, no, we don't like this new measurement here. But they sent it to the sages in Papunya, and they accepted it. And in fact, they call it Ros Papa, the measurement of Papa, because he's the one that invented it and publicized it. Now, for the next few items, we have a mnemonic device, Siman Osre Perot en Osrin, Ve'en Mosi'in Ve'en Mistakerin, Pa'amayim Bebesim Matre'in Ve'lo Mosi'in. All right. Anyway, the first thing is Osre Perot, and we have a Braita that says, Tenor Banan, Osre Perot umalve beribit, umaktine efa, umafki'e she'arim, alena katuv omer, lemor mata yavor hachodesh v'nashbira sheber v'shabat v'niftecha bar, laktin efa, ulhagdil shekel, ulavet mozene mirma, uchtiv, nishba Adonai bigon Yaakov, im eshkach lanesach kol ma'asehem. A very powerful Baraita that says, those who hoard produce, they want to hoard when there's a lot available, and they buy up everything on the market, and then when there's a shortage, then they sell at a high price. This is not fair. It's not good for the consumers, for poor people who can't afford it. They're creating monopolies unfairly. So regarding those people, or people who sell with interest, who lend with interest, that's not allowed. And those who make their measurements smaller, they want to sell less than what they're saying they're selling, so they have false measures, or those who increase prices by selling for more than the accepted price around. Regarding all these people, the pasuk says, a pasuk in Amos, that says, to the people that are swallowing the needy and destroying the poor. You know what these evil people say? They say, we can't wait for Rosh Chodesh so that we can go and sell produce. We can't wait for Shabbat to come because everybody needs to buy a lot of things before Shabbat, and that way we can sell grain. Not because they want to make an honest profit, but rather they can't wait to cheat people so that they can make the measure small, they can make the shekel bigger, and they can falsify the balances of deceit. So look at these people. It's not just that, they're were tempted to take something that wasn't theirs and they feel bad about it. No, these people, they can't wait to cheat people. They just, they do it for fun, and that's what they're all about. So these are especially evil people. And therefore, the Pasuk says about them that Hashem has sworn by the pride of Yaakov, I will never forget what they have done, and they will get a punishment, what is coming to them. Otzre perot, kegon man, amar Rabbi Yochanan, kegon shabetai asar perot. What's an example of a hoarder of produce? Rabbi Yochanan says, I know a guy like that. His name is Shabbetai. He must have been some really terrible guy that 2,000 years later, we remember his name, Shabbetai, the evil hoarder of produce that would monopolize, buy everything at a cheap price, so there was nothing left on the market, and then he could charge exorbitant amounts. Abu Tishmuel, mizaben lehu lepere betar'a, charfa ketar'a charfa. And now we see the sages who went out of their way to sell their goods at a cheap price to help those who could not afford it. And so Shemuel, the father of Shemuel, he would sell produce early in the season at the price that is appropriate early in the season. In other words, early in the season when the produce is coming in, there's a lot of supply, and so the price is low. Later in the season, when supply dries up, then the price increases. So he would make sure to sell everything at the beginning of the season, early in the market when you had the lower price, and that was helpful to people. Shemuel bere mashe lepere umzaben lehu betara afla ketara charfa. But Shemuel, the son of the father of Shemuel, this is the Shemuel, the Amorah, he would do something different. He would keep his produce in his storage places until it was later in the season and the market price was high, and then he would sell it for less. He would sell it at the big market price from the beginning of the season, the low price, when there was less supply. And he thought that would be more helpful because not everybody has enough money to buy early in the season, or they don't realize how much they're going to need. And so he figured that he's helping people more by selling at a cheap price later in the season. Shelachu mitam taba de'aba midibara. My tama tara dirvach revach. And from Eretz Yisrael, they sent an evaluation and they said that what the father does is better than what the son does. Shemuel's father acts in a better way. Why? I mean, after all, there's lots of the market piece selling at the same as the market price. So what's the difference if he also sells at the market price? And the answer is, once the price is eased, it will stay eased by flooding the market at the beginning with a lot of produce. So the opening price will be less than it would be if he was storing it up. And once there's a price set, it tends to stay low throughout the season. So by starting off by having more supply and making the opening price low, even if it goes up a little bit at the end, but nevertheless it will help overall to keep the prices low the whole time by selling it earlier in the season. Amar Rav, Ose Adam et Kabo Osar. Now, regarding hoarding, Rav says that one is permitted to make his own kav into a storeroom. In other words, anything that I grow on my own farm, I'm allowed to keep in storage and decide if I want to sell it early or if I want to sell it later. That's permitted. I don't have to sell all my goods right away. I can hoard my own goods until the price goes up, and I say, oh, now the price went up. I could make more money. That's fine. What you're not allowed to do is go and buy out everything from the market and then store it up and then sell it and use that leverage because you have all the supply, use that to charge any amount that you want. That's not permitted. But if you just do your own, so one single farmer doesn't have so much of the supply that it will cause distress on everybody else. Tanya namehachi en osin perot debarim sheyesh ben haye nefesh kegon yenot shemanim uslatot aval tablin kamon upilpilin mutar. במדרים הם אומרים בלוקח מן השוק, אבל במכניס משלו mutar. And there's a Batra that supports Rav, because it says one is not allowed to hoard fruit and produce that are things that people need in order to live. For example, wines, oils, and flowers. Those are necessary for life, and therefore you can't hoard them, you have to just sell them. However, when it comes to luxury items, spices like cumin and pepper, that you're allowed to hoard. Now, people don't need cumin. I mean, it's good for certain dishes, but that you want to buy it all up and then sell it later. That you can do. Now, when is this true? That's only if you're buying it from the marketplace. That's when you're not allowed to hoard these staple items like wine and oil. However, if it's your own, from your own field that you produced, then it's permitted. You don't have to sell everything that you produce as soon as it's ready. You can decide on your own when to sell it, which is exactly what Rav says. The Baraita continues, Umutar le'adam le'esor perot be'eretz Yisrael shalosh shanim. One is permitted to hoard up, to store away produce in the land of Israel for 3 years, if you're talking about the 3 years around the Shevi'it. Erev Shevi'it u'Shvi'it u'Mosa'eh Shevi'it. During the Shevi'it year, you can't use anything that grows. You also cannot plant anything for that year that will grow the next year. So therefore, the Shevi'it will affect its own year plus the next year. And therefore, Erev Shevi'it, the 6th year, you have anything that grows then, you're going to have to store up for the future. So already in the 6th year, you can store things up, hoard them, and then you'll use some of it during the 6th year, whatever you need, and the rest you will keep there in storage until the 7th year and even till the 1st year of the next Shevi'it. That's permitted because it's necessary so that people will have what to eat all that time. ובשני בשורת אפילו קו חרובין לא יאסור מפני שמכניס מארה בשערים. If it's a time of drought, there's very, very little food, so then you can't hoard everything up, while there's just, let's say a little bit of food, but there's some, you hoard everything up. And then when there's nothing on the market and people are starving, you go and you charge $1,000 for 1 carrot. That you're not allowed to do, not only for delicious fruits, but even carobs, which are barely edible, that you cannot store up because it will cause a terrible curse on the markets. If people are storing basic necessities of food, people are starving, and then all of a sudden they sell things here and they charge all kinds of exorbitant prices. That is not allowed during years of drought. Amar leRabbi Yosef b'Rabbi Chanina lefuga shema'eh pok Esad li pereh shalosh shanim. Erev Shevi'it u'Shvi'it u'Mosa'eh Shevi'it. And now we have an actual story of Rabbi Yosef, the son of Chanina, who told his servant, whose name was Puga, and he said, "Go and store up for me produce for 3 years," and that happened to be the year before the Shevi'it, the year so that they can use it that year, and the year of the Shevi'it, and the year following the Shevi'it. So you see that he followed the exact advice that we just read in the Baraita. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.